The kitchen is hushed, except for the ticking clock. Nathaniel sits slumped, fingers digging into his hair, shame heavy on his shoulders. Across the room, Emily gazes at a stack of unpaid bills, her silence louder than words. That night, defeat wrapped itself around them like chains. Long before that night of silence, Nathaniel had always carried a restless fire inside him. As a boy, he would sketch big dreams on scraps of paper while his friends played outside. He wasn't born into wealth nor into privilege, just narrow streets, worn shoes, and a hunger that gnawed at him daily. But behind those tired eyes was a spark, the kind that refused to die. Emily saw it before anyone else did. She didn't fall in love with what Nathaniel had, because he had almost nothing. She fell in love with what he carried, an unshakable belief that life could be more than survival. While neighbors whispered, while relatives laughed, calling him foolish, Emily stood by him. Their nights weren't filled with fancy dinners, but with bread, hope, and whispered promises in the dark. To her, Nathaniel's fire wasn't just his dream. It became their shared heartbeat. While Nathaniel chased his fragile dream, Emily became the quiet strength holding their world together. She wasn't just his wife. She was his anchor in a storm that never seemed to end. When money ran short, she pretended she wasn't hungry, pushing her plate toward him with a smile that tried to look convincing. When he stayed awake for nights, scribbling ideas that never seemed to work, she sat beside him with a cup of tea, even if her own eyes begged for rest. She hid her tears in the bathroom, running the tap so he wouldn't hear her breaking. To everyone else, Emily looked ordinary, just another woman trying to make ends meet. But in truth, she was sacrificing piece by piece, comfort by comfort, so Nathaniel could keep his fire alive. Their love wasn't wrapped in flowers or candlelight. It was forged in survival, in the heavy silence of nights where hope was all they had left. Failure came knocking again and again, each time louder, each time crueler. Nathaniel's first ventures collapsed before they even had the chance to breathe. Ideas that once looked promising ended in debts, returned calls, and doors slammed shut. The same friends who once laughed with him now laughed at him. Their voices carried a sharper sting. "He'll never make it. He's chasing smoke." Family members joined in, their whispers circling like vultures. At gatherings, Nathaniel felt their eyes on him, measuring his worth against his failures. Each sentence, each smirk, drove another nail into his fragile confidence. Emily heard those words too. At times they echoed in her own heart, when the nights grew colder and the cupboards grew emptier. But when Nathaniel's shoulders sank under the weight, she stood beside him. Even as doubt carved its way through her, she tightened her grip on his hand. She chose to believe not in the success he promised, but in the man she knew he was. Their world was shrinking, their circle growing smaller, but in the ruins of broken ventures, Emily's silent loyalty became the only voice strong enough to fight back against the world's laughter. The weight of failure didn't just crush Nathaniel's dreams, it began to crush their love. In the cramped walls of their small home, arguments erupted like storms. Nathaniel's voice, raw with guilt, echoed through the rooms. "I've dragged you into this misery. You deserve better than me." His words were knives, not against her, but against himself. Emily couldn't hold back anymore. Tears spilled as she clutched his arm, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare quit now. If you stop, then everything we've suffered. All of it will mean nothing." Their nights turned into battlefields, his despair against her desperate hope, his guilt against her unshaken loyalty. The laughter of the world outside had already bruised them, but now the real danger lived inside their home, the fear that love itself might not survive the weight of unfulfilled dreams. Yet even in anger, their voices carried the same truth. They were fighting not to let go. The day that broke Nathaniel began like any other, with hope stitched together by trembling hands. He had polished his pitch, rehearsed his words, and walked into the investor's office with every shred of courage he had left. But hope was torn apart in seconds. Cold eyes, impatient sighs, and then the final blow. "We're not interested. Don't waste our time again." The door closed, firm and final. By the time Nathaniel stepped outside, the sky itself seemed to echo his defeat. Rain poured down, soaking through his thin jacket, washing away the fragile confidence he had carried in. Each step home felt heavier, each puddle a mirror of the man he feared he was becoming. Broken, small, unwanted. When he finally reached their door, Emily was there. She opened it slowly, her face pale, her hands trembling. But this time no words came. No comfort, no fire, just silence. And that silence screamed louder than rejection ever could. For Nathaniel, it was the cruelest wound yet, because when even Emily's voice faltered, the world felt emptier than ever before that night. The rain still tapped against their windows, a cruel reminder of the rejection Nathaniel carried home. He lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, his chest hollow, his mind repeating the investor's cold dismissal. Beside him, Emily thought he was asleep. She turned quietly, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut deeper than thunder. God, if he falls, let me be the one to lift him. Don't let his fire die. Take from me, but keep him standing. Nathaniel froze, every syllable wrapped around his heart. She wasn't praying for herself, not for relief from hunger or escape from the misery they both endured. She was praying for him. That sacrifice, that love, hit harder than every rejection, harder than every insult. In that moment, something shifted. If the world refused to open its doors, he would build his own. If no one believed in him, he would rise with her belief stitched into his bones. The spark wasn't in the investors, or in the money he didn't have. It was right there in Emily's quiet prayer. Out of ashes, Nathaniel felt the first flame of a new beginning ignite. The next morning, resolve replaced despair. Nathaniel and Emily sold their only car, the last symbol of stability they owned. With the cash, they bought just enough to survive and turned their cramped garage into a makeshift office. The walls smelled of dust and oil, but to Nathaniel it was the birthplace of something new. Emily carried the heavier burden outside those walls. She took on 2 jobs, her hands blistered, her body weary. Yet every night she returned with quiet strength, slipping him a smile that said, "Keep going." Nathaniel worked through endless nights, eyes burning under the glow of a borrowed laptop. Each email unanswered, each door slammed could have broken him, but didn't. Rejections piled up, but so did his grit. And then, like a tiny sprout pushing through cracked earth, small signs of progress began to show. An interested reply, a meeting, a fragile seed of hope, planted by sacrifice, watered by sleepless nights. Weeks of silence finally cracked when a single email arrived. A small client was willing to take a chance on Nathaniel's idea. It wasn't a fortune, not even close, but it was enough to cover groceries without begging credit from the shopkeeper. For the first time in months, the heaviness in their home lifted. That evening, Nathaniel placed the payment on the table like a trophy. Emily's eyes glistened, not because of the money, but because she saw the fire in him burning stronger than ever. They didn't buy champagne or steak or luxuries they couldn't afford. Instead, they sat together with bread, butter, and hot tea, laughing like children who had stumbled upon treasure. To outsiders, it was nothing more than a meal. To them, it was proof that their sacrifices weren't in vain. That night, their tiny garage no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a beginning, fragile yet alive, and carrying the taste of victory sweeter than gold. Momentum had finally begun to build. The small client had opened doors to bigger conversations, and Nathaniel dared to believe the tide was turning. But just as hope began to steady its fragile legs, betrayal came like a knife to the back. A partner he trusted, a man who had shared coffee in their garage, laughed at their struggles and promised loyalty, stole everything. He took their idea, their fragile reputation, and even their only client. Overnight, Nathaniel's budding dream was ripped away. The garage, once filled with the hum of typing and whispered plans, fell into dead silence. Nathaniel's fists slammed against the desk, rage spilling into the air, his voice hoarse as he cursed the betrayal. Emily stood in the doorway, her face pale with exhaustion. She had carried 2 jobs, endured sleepless nights, and sacrificed every comfort, only to watch it all crumble again. For the first time, doubt filled her eyes. She wondered if this was the moment that would finally break them. As Nathaniel paced the garage, consumed by fury, Emily's silence returned. A silence not of strength this time, but of a woman standing on the edge of hopelessness. The dream seemed closer to ashes than ever before. That night, the garage felt colder than ever. Nathaniel sat slumped over his desk, broken by betrayal, his hands trembling with rage and exhaustion. His dream had been stolen, and with it his will to keep fighting. He whispered to himself, almost in surrender, "Maybe they were right. Maybe I was never meant to make it." Emily stood in the doorway, her face shadowed by fatigue, but her voice carried a strength sharper than steel. "If you quit now," she said, her eyes locked on his, Then everything, every sleepless night, every meal we skipped, every tear I hid, meant nothing. Don't you dare make our pain meaningless. Her words pierced deeper than rejection, deeper than betrayal. They weren't just a plea. They were a command, a demand that their sacrifices hold weight. Nathaniel felt the despair in his chest shift. This defeat would not be his grave. It would be the fire of his rebirth. He looked at Emily, her tired frame, her unshaken gaze, and something inside him reignited. That night wasn't about choosing between success or failure. It was about choosing whether to die with dreams unfulfilled or to rise with nothing but grit and the love of the woman who refused to let him fall. From the ashes of betrayal, Nathaniel rose with a fire sharper than before. Gone was the naive dreamer who trusted too easily. What remained was a man hardened by pain, fueled by resolve. He cold-called hundreds of strangers each day, his voice hoarse but relentless. When doors slammed, he knocked harder. Days blurred into nights as he coded endlessly, fingers raw against the keyboard, sweat dripping onto the desk. Sleep became a luxury he could no longer afford. Meanwhile, Emily transformed their cramped living room into a bustling office, papers stacked high, phones constantly ringing, her presence the backbone of his second chance. And slowly, the tide began to turn. One client came back, then another. But this time they weren't small. Bigger names, larger deals, contracts that made their garage days feel like distant echoes. Each victory carried the taste of redemption, proof that the betrayal had not destroyed them. It had forged them. Years passed, and the man once drenched in rain and rejection now stood beneath blinding lights. Nathaniel walked across a grand stage, introduced as a billionaire founder. Cameras flashed, applause shook the room, and the world that once mocked him now celebrated his name. But as the crowd roared, Nathaniel's eyes didn't rest on the investors, or the journalists, or the flashing screens. They searched for the one face that had never turned away, and there she was, Emily. Standing quietly in the front row, tears streaming down her cheeks, her smile trembling with pride. She wasn't just witnessing his triumph, she was part of it. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every tear had led to this moment. Nathaniel didn't see billions in that applause. He saw their journey, their survival, their love. And in that instant, victory belonged not to him alone, but to both of them. Nathaniel's voice carries over the final frame, steady and deep. Defeat is never the end. It's the fire that forges you, if you have someone who refuses to let you burn alone. The screen fades to black, leaving hearts stirred, urging viewers to subscribe for more untold journeys.